The gunshot echoed through the Montana hills as Elijah Granger dug his spurs into his horse's flanks, urging the tired beast forward through the gathering dusk. Blood soaked his left sleeve, the wound throbbing with every gallop as he fled the scene of the ambush. 3 days on the trail, chasing down Prescott's gang, and all he had to show for it was a bullet in his arm and the knowledge that Hannah was waiting, likely worried sick by now. It was 1878, and the territory was still wild despite the encroachment of civilization. Elijah had been tracking the gang that had robbed the Sweetwater Valley Bank for nearly a week, leaving behind the small homestead he and Hannah had built just outside Las Vegas, New Mexico territory. The newly established town was growing rapidly since the railroad had arrived, but the surrounding land remained untamed and dangerous. Just a bit farther, Diablo, he murmured to his midnight black stallion as they crested another hill. The horse's sides heaved with exhaustion, having covered nearly 40 miles since dawn. In the distance, the faint outline of their cabin appeared against the darkening sky, and Elijah's heart leapt at the sight of a single light glowing from the window. Hannah had kept her promise, a lantern burning to guide him home. Elijah had met Hannah Ellis 2 years prior when he'd escorted a stagecoach into Las Vegas. She had been a schoolteacher newly arrived from Boston, determined to bring education to the frontier. He'd been a former Texas Ranger turned bounty hunter, tracking outlaws across the territories. Their paths had crossed at the town's only hotel, and despite their differences, they'd fallen deeply in love. 6 months later, they'd married and built their cabin on a small plot of land with dreams of starting a ranch and perhaps a family. As Elijah approached the homestead, he could make out the silhouette of Hannah standing in the doorway, her figure framed by the warm glow behind her. The pain in his arm seemed less important now that she was in sight. Diablo slowed to a trot, then a walk, his head hanging low with fatigue. "Elijah!" Hannah called out, rushing toward him as he slid from the saddle, nearly collapsing from weakness. "My God, you're hurt!" She was beautiful in the fading light, her auburn hair loosely braided and falling over one shoulder, her green eyes wide with concern. She wore a simple cotton dress, hastily covered with a shawl against the evening chill. "It's nothing," he lied, grimacing as she helped him toward the cabin. "Just a scratch." "Don't you lie to me, Elijah Granger," she scolded, her voice trembling slightly. "I can see the blood from here. Come inside before you fall over." The cabin was modest but comfortable, with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, and a bed in the corner covered with a quilt Hannah had made during the long winter evenings. A pot of stew simmered on the stove, and the smell made Elijah's empty stomach growl. Hannah helped him to a chair and immediately began cutting away the sleeve of his shirt. "I was beginning to think you weren't coming back," she said softly, examining the wound. The bullet had passed through the flesh of his upper arm, missing the bone. "When you didn't return after a week." "I'm sorry," Elijah said, wincing as she began cleaning the wound with whiskey. "The trail led farther north than I expected. Prescott and his boys are headed toward Wyoming territory. And you let them go." There was a hint of hope in her voice. Hannah had never approved of his dangerous profession, even though it was how he had saved enough money to buy their land. "Had to," he admitted. "They ambushed me near Raton Pass. I was lucky to get away with just this." He nodded toward his arm. Hannah worked silently, cleaning and binding his wound with practiced hands. She'd learned quickly how to tend injuries in their time together. When she finished, she brought him a bowl of stew and a cup of coffee. "You need to eat," she said, sitting across from him. "Then rest. We can talk in the morning." Elijah studied her face as he ate, noting the dark circles beneath her eyes and the way her hands trembled slightly. "Have you been keeping the lantern burning every night?" She nodded. "From dusk till dawn. I wanted to make sure you could find your way home, no matter how late you returned." She hesitated. Mrs. Abernathy from town came by yesterday. Said I was foolish to wait for you, that I should accept that most men in your line of work don't live long. Elijah set down his spoon, reaching across the table to take her hand. That old widow doesn't know what she's talking about. I'll always come home to you, Hannah. Always. I worry every time you leave, she admitted, tears gathering in her eyes. Each time, I wonder if it's the last time I'll see you. The weight of her words settled on Elijah's shoulders. He'd promised her when they married that he would give up bounty hunting once they had enough saved to expand their ranch. But there was always one more job, one more outlaw with a price on his head. I've been thinking, he said slowly, about what you said before I left, about starting our family. He squeezed her hand. Maybe it's time I hung up my gun for good. Hannah's eyes widened. Do you mean it, Elijah? Truly? I do, he said, surprised to find he meant it. I've lost too many friends to this life. I don't want to lose you too. Later that night, as they lay in bed, Hannah curled against his uninjured side. Elijah stared at the ceiling, thinking about the future. The bounty on Prescott would have been substantial enough to buy a small herd of cattle to start their ranch properly. But for the first time, he didn't feel the pull to pursue it. I kept that lantern burning because I believe in you, Hannah murmured sleepily. I believe in us. Elijah kissed the top of her head. I promise, from now on, you won't have to worry about me coming home late and weary anymore. But promises made in the quiet of night often faced harsh tests in the light of day. Morning arrived with a pounding on their door that startled both of them awake. Elijah reached for his revolver instinctively, wincing as pain shot through his injured arm. Stay here, he told Hannah, pulling on his trousers and moving cautiously toward the door. He opened it to find Sheriff Thomas Wilcox standing there, hat in hand. The lawman looked grim, his weathered face set in hard lines. Morning, Granger, he said. Sorry to disturb you and Mrs. Granger so early. What brings you out this way, Sheriff? Elijah asked, relaxing slightly but keeping his hand near his holster out of habit. Prescott's gang hit Las Vegas last night, Wilcox said. Robbed the bank and killed 2 men, including Deputy Roberts. Elijah's stomach clenched. Young Roberts had been barely 20, newly married himself. I thought they were headed north. Doubled back, apparently. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. Word is you were on their trail. Figured you might want to know they're offering $1,000 bounty now. Hannah appeared behind Elijah, wrapped in her robe. Sheriff, she greeted politely, though her face had gone pale. Madam, Wilcox touched his hat respectfully. Just bringing your husband up to speed on the situation in town. My husband was wounded tracking those men, Hannah said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. He needs time to recover. Wilcox nodded. Of course, just thought he should know. He turned to leave, then paused. They also burned down the schoolhouse, Mrs. Granger said it was a message. After the sheriff rode away, Hannah and Elijah stood in silence. The schoolhouse had been Hannah's pride, where she taught the children of Las Vegas 3 days a week. She'd raised the money for books herself, convincing reluctant parents that education was worth the investment. A message, Hannah repeated, her voice hollow. For you or for me? Both, I'd wager, Elijah said grimly. Prescott knows I'm tracking him, and he knows about you. Hannah moved to the window, staring out at the rising sun. What happens now? She asked quietly. Elijah wanted to reassure her, to repeat his promise from the night before, but the words wouldn't come. Deputy Roberts had been a friend. The schoolhouse had been Hannah's dream. I don't know, he admitted. Hannah turned to face him, her expression resolute. Yes, you do. You're going after them. Hannah, you have to, she interrupted. Not for the bounty, but because it's who you are. You can't let them hurt people and walk away. Elijah crossed the room to her, taking her face gently in his hands. Last night I promised you I was done. And I believe you will be, she said, covering his hands with her own. After this, after Prescott, she took a deep breath. But Elijah, I'm coming with you. He stared at her in disbelief. That's not happening. I can shoot, she reminded him. You taught me yourself. And I know this territory as well as you do from my school visits to the outlying homesteads. It's too dangerous. It's dangerous here alone too, she countered. If they burned the schoolhouse as a message, who's to say they won't come for our home next? At least together we have a chance. Elijah wanted to argue, but the determination in Hannah's eyes stopped him. She was right, Prescott's gang wouldn't hesitate to target her to get to him. And she was surprisingly skilled with a rifle, a necessity for any frontier woman left alone for long periods. You'd have to do exactly as I say, he finally conceded. A small smile touched her lips. I'll consider your suggestions carefully. Despite the gravity of the situation, Elijah found himself chuckling. You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met, Hannah Ellis Granger. And don't you forget it, she replied, rising on her toes to kiss him lightly. They spent the day preparing. Elijah cleaned his weapons while Hannah packed provisions and changed into riding clothes, trousers, and a man's shirt she'd altered to fit her slender frame, with her hair braided and tucked under a wide-brimmed hat. She looked nothing like the refined schoolteacher who had arrived from Boston. By mid-afternoon, they were ready. Elijah's arm ached, but he'd regained enough strength to ride. Hannah mounted her mare, Penny, with the ease of someone who'd grown accustomed to frontier life. Sheriff Wilcox said they were heading south, Elijah told her as they rode away from their cabin. Likely toward the territorial border. If they cross into Mexico, they'll be beyond our reach. Hannah nodded, her expression serious. Then we'd better catch them before they do. They rode hard through the afternoon, following the trail left by Prescott's gang, not bothering to hide their tracks, confident in their head start. As the sun began to set, Elijah spotted a plume of smoke rising from a canyon ahead. We'll approach on foot from here, he told Hannah, dismounting and tethering Diablo to a scrub oak. Stay behind me, and if anything happens, you ride back to Las Vegas. Understand? Hannah's lips thinned, but she nodded, securing Penny beside Diablo. They moved silently through the brush, crouching low as they approached the rim of the canyon. Below, Prescott's gang had made camp beside a small stream, 5 men lounging around a fire as they passed a bottle between them. That's them, Elijah whispered, pointing out Prescott, a hulking man with a thick beard and a scar running from his eye to his jaw. 5 of them, all armed. We're outnumbered. What's the plan? Hannah asked, her voice steady despite the danger. Elijah studied the camp, noting the positions of the men and the lay of the land. We wait until they're asleep, then move in quietly. With luck, we can disarm them before they know we're there. As darkness fell, they watched as the outlaws finished their meal and settled around the fire, 2 taking first watch while the others rolled into their blankets. Elijah and Hannah waited patiently, the hours passing slowly as the night deepened. Now, Elijah whispered when the guards' heads began to nod, overcome by whiskey and fatigue. They descended into the canyon silently, moving from shadow to shadow. Elijah's heart pounded as they approached the sleeping camp, his injured arm protesting every movement. Hannah followed close behind, her rifle ready. They were 20 yards from the nearest outlaw when a twig snapped beneath Hannah's boot. The sound, though slight, was enough to startle one of the drowsing guards, who jerked upright with a shout. Ambush! He yelled, grabbing for his pistol. Elijah fired first, his bullet finding the man's shoulder. The camp erupted in chaos, outlaws scrambling for weapons as Elijah and Hannah ducked behind a boulder. "So much for the quiet approach," Hannah said, her face pale but determined in the moonlight. Gunfire erupted around them, bullets chipping away at their cover. Elijah returned fire methodically, conserving ammunition while looking for an opportunity to end the standoff. "We're pinned down," he muttered as a bullet whizzed past his ear. Hannah peered around the edge of the boulder, then quickly pulled back as shots peppered the stone. "There's a gully to our left," she said. "If I provide covering fire, could you make it there for a better angle?" Elijah hesitated, reluctant to leave her exposed. "I'll be fine," she insisted, reading his expression. "On 3. Before he could object, she began counting. 1, 2, 3. Hannah leaned out, firing steadily as Elijah sprinted for the gully. He dove into the depression just as bullets kicked up dirt at his heels. From his new position, he had a clear line of sight to 2 of the outlaws. His first shot caught one in the leg. His second sent the other diving for cover. The distraction gave Hannah the chance to reposition as well, moving to a cluster of rocks several yards away. Together, they had effectively split the outlaws' attention. "Whoever's out there," Prescott's voice boomed across the canyon, "you're making a big mistake. We've got you outnumbered." "Seems fair, considering you had the jump on me at Raton Pass," Elijah called back. A pause, then Prescott's laugh echoed against the canyon walls. "Granger, is that you? Thought we'd seen the last of you. I'm harder to kill than you think, Prescott." "Maybe so," the outlaw leader replied. "But what about that pretty wife of yours? Heard she likes to keep a lantern burning in the window. Real touching. Be a shame if something happened to her while you're out here wasting your time." Elijah felt cold fury wash over him at the threat to Hannah. He glanced toward her position, relieved to see she remained hidden and safe for the moment. "You burned down her schoolhouse," Elijah called back. "She took that personally. Did she now?" Prescott chuckled. "Well, you can tell her I'm sorry when you see her, if you see her." The exchange gave Elijah time to assess their situation. The outlaws had spread out, trying to flank them. They needed to act quickly before they were surrounded. A shot rang out from Hannah's position, followed by a cry of pain. She'd hit one of the men trying to circle behind them. "Nice shot, Mrs. Granger," Elijah murmured to himself, pride mingling with fear for her safety. The firefight intensified, bullets flying from all directions as the outlaws grew increasingly desperate. Elijah managed to wound another, reducing their effective fighting force to 3, including Prescott. Suddenly, Hannah cried out. Elijah's heart stopped as he saw her clutch her upper arm, blood seeping between her fingers. "Hannah!" he shouted, his voice raw with panic. "I'm all right," she called back, though her face was tight with pain. "Just grazed me." Rage filled Elijah, clearing his mind with cold precision. He counted his remaining bullets, 4 in his revolver, plus his rifle. "Enough to finish this." "Prescott," he shouted. "This ends now." "Couldn't agree more, Granger," came the reply, followed by a barrage of gunfire toward Hannah's position. Elijah made his decision in an instant. While Prescott's men focused on Hannah, he burst from cover, firing as he ran directly toward the outlaw leader's position. His first shot missed, his second grazed Prescott's arm, but his third caught one of the remaining men in the chest. Prescott turned in surprise, raising his pistol, but Elijah was already upon him, tackling him to the ground. They grappled in the dirt, Prescott's size giving him an advantage as he drove his fist into Elijah's wounded arm. Pain exploded through Elijah's body, but he held on, blocking Prescott's attempt to bring his gun to bear. The sound of a rifle being cocked stopped them both. Hannah stood over them, her rifle aimed steadily at Prescott's head despite the blood staining her sleeve. "Don't move!" she told Prescott, her voice remarkably calm. The outlaw leader glared up at her. You don't have the stomach for it, schoolteacher. Hannah's finger tightened on the trigger. You burned my school. You threatened my students. You shot my husband. I have plenty of stomach for it. Elijah rolled away, drawing his revolver and keeping it trained on Prescott. It's over, he told the outlaw. The remaining bounty on you is enough to rebuild the schoolhouse and then some. Prescott spat in the dirt. You think you've won? There'll be others. Always are on the frontier. Maybe, Elijah acknowledged. But they won't be you. They bound Prescott and his one surviving man securely, treating their wounds enough to ensure they'd survive the journey back to Las Vegas. Hannah allowed Elijah to examine her arm. The bullet had indeed only grazed her, though it had left an angry furrow that would need proper tending. You were magnificent, Elijah told her as he bandaged her wound with strips torn from his shirt. Terrifying, but magnificent. Hannah's laugh was shaky with delayed shock. I was terrified. I still am. She looked at their prisoners. What happens now? We take them in, collect the bounty, and go home, Elijah said simply. And then I keep my promise. No more bounty hunting. The return journey to Las Vegas was slow and tense, with Prescott and his man bound to their horses and Elijah constantly vigilant for any attempt at escape. Hannah rode beside him, occasionally swaying with fatigue but refusing to stop until they reached town. Sheriff Wilcox was waiting at his office when they arrived, alerted by the commotion their procession caused coming down the main street. His eyebrows rose at the sight of Hannah, her arm bandaged and her clothes dusty and blood-stained. Mrs. Granger, he said, removing his hat. This is quite unexpected. She's the one you can thank for bringing Prescott in, Elijah said proudly. She outshot his entire gang. The sheriff looked skeptical but nodded respectfully to Hannah before ordering his deputies to take the prisoners to the jail cells. The territorial marshal will be here in 2 days to transport them to Santa Fe for trial, he told Elijah. The bounty will be paid once he arrives. Word spread quickly through Las Vegas about the schoolteacher who had helped capture the notorious Prescott gang. By evening, a small crowd had gathered outside the doctor's office where Hannah and Elijah were having their wounds properly treated. You're quite the celebrity now, Dr. Morrison commented as he finished stitching Hannah's arm. The Ladies' Society won't know what to make of you. Hannah smiled tiredly. I imagine Mrs. Abernathy will have plenty to say about it. Let her talk, Elijah said, taking Hannah's hand. You've earned the right to be proud. They spent the night at the Las Vegas hotel, too exhausted to make the ride back to their homestead. As they lay in the unfamiliar bed, Hannah curled against Elijah's side as she had so many nights before. He found himself reflecting on how close he'd come to losing everything. I meant what I said, he told her quietly. No more bounty hunting. The reward for Prescott will give us a good start on the ranch, and I can find honest work in town if needed. Hannah propped herself up on her elbow to look at him. Are you certain? It's been your life for so long. You're my life now, he said simply. You and whatever future we build together. 2 days later, they watched as Marshal Jenkins loaded Prescott and his man onto a prison wagon bound for Santa Fe. The marshal handed Elijah an envelope containing the bounty $1,000 in cash, a fortune by frontier standards. Heard your wife was instrumental in the capture, Jenkins said, glancing at Hannah with newfound respect. That's quite something, madam. She's quite something, Elijah agreed, putting his arm around Hannah's shoulders. As they rode back to their homestead that afternoon, the future seemed brighter than it had in years. The money would allow them to purchase cattle and expand their land, perhaps even hire a few hands to help with the ranch. Hannah had already begun making plans to rebuild the schoolhouse, this time with proper windows and a small library. What will you do now that you're not chasing outlaws? Hannah asked as their cabin came into view, looking peaceful in the late afternoon sun. Elijah considered the question. Learn to be a rancher, I suppose, and a husband who's actually present. You've always been present when it mattered, she assured him, reaching across to squeeze his hand. Even when you were miles away, I felt you with me. That's why I kept the lantern burning. That night, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the New Mexico sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Elijah felt truly at peace for the first time in years. No need to keep his gun close. No need to sleep with one eye open. Just the comfort of home and the woman he loved. I have something to tell you, Hannah said quietly, her hand finding his in the gathering dusk. Something I've suspected for a few weeks but wasn't certain of until recently. Elijah turned to her, noting the soft smile playing at the corners of her mouth. What is it? I'm with child, she said, her eyes shining with happiness and nervous anticipation. Due sometime in the winter, according to my calculations. For a moment, Elijah couldn't speak, overwhelmed by the emotions flooding through him: joy, fear, wonder. Then he pulled Hannah into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world, which, to him, she was. A child, he whispered against her hair. Our child. Are you happy? She asked, her voice muffled against his chest. More than I ever thought possible, he assured her, leaning back to look into her eyes. Though I'm not sure I deserve such happiness. You deserve it, Hannah said firmly. We both do. The news of the baby added urgency to their plans for the ranch. Throughout the summer and into fall, Elijah worked tirelessly to prepare for both their growing family and their new enterprise. He purchased 30 head of cattle, built a proper barn, and fenced several acres of pasture. Hannah divided her time between helping with the ranch, teaching at the newly rebuilt schoolhouse in town, and preparing for the baby. Word of their success spread, and soon other settlers began purchasing land nearby, drawn by the promise of community and the relative safety that Elijah's reputation provided. By November, a small settlement had formed within riding distance of their homestead, with families building cabins and breaking ground for farms. Winter came early that year, bringing heavy snows and bitter cold. Elijah fretted over Hannah's condition, insisting she remain at home rather than make the increasingly difficult journey to town to teach. She reluctantly agreed, turning their cabin into a haven of warmth and preparation for the baby's arrival. On a particularly frigid December evening, as a blizzard howled outside, Hannah's labor began. Elijah sent their nearest neighbor, young William Thompson, to fetch the midwife from Las Vegas, but the storm made travel nearly impossible. She might not make it in time, Hannah said between contractions, her face pale with pain and effort. You may have to help me yourself. Elijah had faced down armed outlaws without flinching, but the prospect of delivering his own child filled him with terror. I don't know how, he admitted, clutching her hand. We'll figure it out together, she assured him, her strength humbling him once again. Women have been doing this since the beginning of time. For hours, Hannah labored while Elijah did everything he could to comfort her, keeping her cool with damp cloths, supporting her as she walked around the cabin, murmuring encouragement as the pains intensified. As midnight approached, the storm reached its peak, the wind shrieking around their cabin like lost souls. It's coming, Hannah gasped, her body tensing with another contraction. Elijah, the baby is coming now. He helped her back to their bed, positioning her as she directed. His hands trembled as he prepared to receive his child, but his voice remained steady, offering Hannah the strength she needed for these final moments. I can see the head, he told her, amazement replacing fear. Just a little more, Hannah. You're doing wonderfully. With a final, tremendous effort, Hannah brought their child into the world, a son with a shock of dark hair, and a lusty cry that filled the cabin. Elijah carefully tied and cut the cord as Hannah had explained earlier, then wrapped the baby in a soft blanket before placing him in his exhausted mother's arms. "He's perfect," Hannah whispered, tears streaming down her face as she counted tiny fingers and toes. "Our son." Elijah sat beside them, overwhelmed by the miracle he had witnessed and the fierce love that engulfed him at the sight of his wife and child. "What shall we call him?" Hannah studied the baby's face, then looked up at Elijah with a smile. "Samuel. It means God has heard, because he heard all our prayers for a family." "Samuel Granger," Elijah repeated, touching the baby's cheek gently. "Welcome to the world, son." The midwife arrived the following morning, after the storm had passed, to find mother and baby doing well despite the unorthodox delivery. She praised Elijah's unexpected skill and Hannah's resilience, declaring them both naturals at parenthood. As winter gave way to spring, their small homestead flourished. The cattle thrived on the new grass, and Elijah's careful management resulted in a healthy first crop of calves. Hannah recovered quickly from the birth, dividing her time between caring for Samuel and returning to her teaching duties once the weather improved. Their son grew rapidly, a happy baby with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. He became the center of their world, a living symbol of the love they had built together. On the anniversary of their confrontation with Prescott's gang, Elijah took Hannah to the highest point on their property, where they could see for miles across the valley. The land that had once seemed so wild and untamed now showed signs of settlement everywhere, homesteads dotting the landscape, smoke rising from chimneys, fields plowed and planted. "It's changing so quickly," Hannah observed, Samuel sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Soon it won't be the frontier anymore. Does that make you sad?" Elijah asked, noting the wistfulness in her voice. She considered the question. "A little. There's something special about being part of the beginning of things. But I'm glad for the changes too. Samuel will grow up with neighbors and schools and less danger than we faced." Elijah nodded, understanding what she meant. The wildness that had shaped them both was slowly receding, giving way to civilization. It was necessary, even beneficial, but something essential would be lost in the transition. "I've been thinking," he said, gesturing toward the valley below, "about expanding our operation. The railroad's buying beef for their work crews, and the new settlements need meat. We could double our herd by next year, and you'll need more hands to manage it," Hannah added, seeing where his thoughts were leading. "A proper ranch." "With a proper ranch house," Elijah confirmed. "Something bigger than the cabin. Room for Samuel to have his own space. Maybe room for more children someday." Hannah's smile lit up her face. "I'd like that very much." As they stood together looking out over their land, Elijah reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a chance meeting in a frontier hotel to building a life together against all odds, their story had been one of perseverance and deep, abiding love. "Do you ever miss it?" Hannah asked suddenly. "The excitement of tracking outlaws? The freedom of riding wherever the trail led you?" Elijah considered the question honestly. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it," he admitted. "Knowing exactly who the bad guys were, having a clear purpose each day." He looked down at Samuel, sleeping peacefully in Hannah's arms. "But I wouldn't trade this life for anything. This is what matters." Hannah leaned against him, and they watched as the sun began to set, painting the landscape in the same brilliant colors they had admired on the night she told him about the baby. It was a reminder that some things remained constant even as everything else changed. "We should head back," Elijah said as the air grew cooler. "It'll be dark soon." "I left the lantern burning," Hannah told him with a smile, referencing their old tradition, "to guide us home." As they walked back toward their cabin, Elijah thought about the lantern in the window that had become such a powerful symbol in their life together. It had started as Hannah's way of ensuring he could find his way home on dark nights, but it had become something more, a beacon of hope, a reminder of constancy in an uncertain world. The years passed, bringing both joys and sorrows. Their ranch prospered, eventually growing into one of the largest operations in the territory. Samuel was joined by a sister, Elizabeth, born 3 years later, and then by another brother, James, 2 years after that. Each birth reinforced the blessing of the family they had created together. Las Vegas grew from a frontier town into a bustling community, and Hannah's little schoolhouse expanded into a proper school with multiple teachers and classrooms. Though she eventually stepped back from full-time teaching to focus on raising their children, she remained deeply involved in education, serving on the school board and organizing the town's first library. Elijah never returned to bounty hunting, though his reputation ensured that trouble rarely found its way to their doorstep. Instead, he channeled his energy into building their ranch and occasionally helping the sheriff track down rustlers or other troublemakers. His past experience proved valuable as the territory moved toward statehood, with various officials seeking his advice on law enforcement matters. Their children grew strong and capable, each developing their own talents and interests. Samuel showed a gift for working with horses that surpassed even Elijah's skills, while Elizabeth inherited Hannah's passion for books and learning. Young James revealed an unexpected talent for numbers and business, keeping the ranch's accounts from the time he was 12. Through it all, Elijah and Hannah remained each other's anchors, their love deepening with each passing year. The trials they had faced together in those early days had forged a bond that couldn't be broken, a partnership based on mutual respect, shared dreams, and unwavering commitment. On their 20th wedding anniversary, their children organized a celebration that brought together friends and neighbors from miles around. The ranch house that Elijah had promised built 10 years earlier when their growing family outgrew the original cabin was filled with laughter and music as people gathered to honor the couple who had helped shape the community. During a quiet moment, Elijah found Hannah standing on the porch, gazing up at the stars that shone so brightly in the New Mexico sky. "Happy anniversary," he said, joining her and slipping his arm around her waist. At 45, she was still beautiful to him, the lines around her eyes and the silver threading through her auburn hair only adding to her grace. 20 years, she marveled, leaning into him. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I arrived in that dusty little town, and sometimes it feels like I've known you forever. I knew the moment I saw you step off that stagecoach that my life was about to change," Elijah told her. "I just didn't realize how completely." Hannah laughed softly. "As I recall, you were rather gruff and intimidating. I thought you were the most dangerous man I'd ever met." "I was," he said with a wink. "Still am." "Oh, certainly," she teased, "especially when Elizabeth brings up the subject of that young Thompson boy who keeps calling on her." Elijah groaned. At 16, their daughter was becoming a beauty who attracted attention whenever they went to town. William Thompson's son, Mark, had been particularly persistent in his attentions, much to Elijah's dismay. "She's too young," he insisted, though they both knew it was a losing battle. Girls married young on the frontier, and Elizabeth was nearly the age Hannah had been when she first came west. "She's the same age I was when I left Boston," Hannah reminded him gently. "And Mark is a good boy from a good family." "No one is good enough for her," Elijah grumbled, but without real heat. The Thompson family had been their neighbors and friends for years, and Mark had proven himself hard-working and honorable. Inside the house, someone started playing a fiddle, the sweet notes drifting out to where they stood. Elijah recognized the tune, the same waltz that had played at their wedding so many years before. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Granger?" he asked, offering his hand with a formal bow. Hannah curtsied playfully. "I would be delighted, Mr. Granger." They danced under the stars, swaying gently to the music while inside their home, the celebration continued. Their 3 children watched from the window, Samuel now a tall young man of 19, Elizabeth blossoming into womanhood, and 14-year-old James already showing signs of the man he would become. "Do you remember that night when you came home wounded, and I had the lantern burning in the window?" Hannah asked as they danced. "I was so afraid I'd lost you." "I remember," Elijah said softly. "It was the night I promised to give up bounty hunting. And the night before we went after Prescott together," Hannah added. "I was terrified, but I couldn't bear the thought of you facing them alone." Elijah pulled her closer. "You saved my life that night, in more ways than one." As the music ended, they remained in each other's arms, reluctant to break the spell of the moment. Around them, the ranch slept peacefully, cattle in the pastures, horses in the barn, chickens in the coop. The empire they had built from nothing, fueled by hard work and unwavering belief in each other. "We should go back inside," Hannah said eventually. "It's our party after all." Elijah nodded, but before they turned to go, he took her face in his hands and kissed her tenderly. "I love you, Hannah Ellis Granger, more than I could ever say." "And I love you," she replied, her eyes shining in the starlight. "Always have, always will." As they rejoined their guests, Elijah looked around at the life they had created together, their children, their home, their friends. It was more than he had ever dreamed possible on those long, lonely rides as a bounty hunter, more than Hannah had imagined when she left Boston to teach in a frontier town. They had built it all from a chance meeting and a shared vision, from a lantern burning in a window and a promise to always find their way home to each other. And in a world where nothing was certain, that promise had proven unbreakable. Years later, when their grandchildren asked how they had met and fallen in love, Elijah would smile at Hannah across the room, the connection between them as strong as ever, and begin the story. "It was 1876, and your grandmother had just arrived in Las Vegas to teach school." And Hannah would add, her voice soft with memory, "And your grandfather rode in with the stagecoach, covered in dust and looking like the most dangerous man I'd ever seen." The children would listen wide-eyed as they recounted their adventures, the pursuit of outlaws, the shootout in the canyon, the building of the ranch. Some details were softened for young ears, others embellished with the passage of time, but the heart of the story remained the same. A love that had defied the dangers of the frontier and withstood the test of time. On winter evenings, Hannah still placed a lantern in the window, a tradition that had outlived its original purpose but retained its meaning. No longer needed to guide a weary cowboy home through the darkness. It had become a symbol of their enduring love, a light that burns steady and true through all of life's storms. "Why do you still put the lantern there, Grandma?" little Sarah, Elizabeth's daughter, once asked. "Grandpa's already home." Hannah had smiled, touching the child's curls gently. "Because some traditions are worth keeping, even when they're no longer necessary. They remind us of where we've been and how far we've come." And on the porch, listening unseen, Elijah had nodded in agreement, understanding perfectly what his wife meant. The lantern in the window wasn't just about finding one's way home through physical darkness, it was about the light that guided them through life's challenges. The beacon that had led them to each other and to the life they had built together. It was a reminder that no matter how late and weary the journey, there was always light and love waiting at the end of the trail. And that was a lesson worth passing down through the generations, long after the wild frontier had given way to civilization, long after the last cowboy had ridden home.